I haven't heard a single Manosphere advocate come out against the pill on principle, only instrumentally in that it drives women crazy, bro. But also I need it because I don't want to father a bunch of kids while I'm shitting about.
You brought up a fantastic point as well about the Manosphere, where I have actually a big problem with that kind of sphere personally, only because I just see it as repackaged feminism.
I'm thinking, of course, of a man who most of us at Lotus Eaters have now had a spat with through no fault of our own, really, because we've been quite polite and engaging in good faith with him.
No, I shouldn't be looking at this. You know, it was kind of like that. And I find that there's a lot of that within the conservative space in terms of culture. I mean, do you see the same?
Yeah, it's the musical equivalent of a snuff film. I mean, I don't understand why MAGA rap is a thing. She said that woke means the redistribution of wealth, land, power, and I'd add recognition to that, along race, class, gender, and sexuality lines. What she basically means is gay race communism. That's what woke is. Yeah. It's gay race communism.
So then does the right have a woke problem, do you think?
Well, I don't know anyone on the right that wants gay race communism that is actually of the right.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to episode 2 of the State of It podcast with your host, Lewis Brackpool, talking all things politics, culture, and agendas. In today's episode, I would like to welcome my guest and friend, Connor Tomlinson. Connor is a writer and podcast host at lotuseaters.com, a podcast that is arguably one of the most popular political podcasts in the United Kingdom and continues to be a rising force in the UK that talks all things news, culture, philosophy, politics, and more. Connor is also a writer and was a co-founder and head of research at the British Conservation Alliance between 2019 to 2022, where he published the research paper titled "It's Easy Being Green" with the Adam Smith Institute. He is also a political commentator for GB News and TalkTV and various other stations, and wrote regular columns for the Global Warming Policy Foundation, C3 Solutions magazine, and the American Spectator, and I consider Connor a dear friend. In this podcast, Connor and I delve into the subjects of masculinity, and what does the future hold for the next generation of men? We touched on what issues hold the right of politics back from winning, dating and the Manosphere movement, and dissecting polls which state that younger generations are divided on topics such as gender, dating, and religion. I hope you all enjoy it as much as I did talking with Connor, and a reminder that this episode is available to watch on YouTube, Rumble, and to listen to on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Connor Tomlinson, thank you so much for joining me. How are you, good sir?
Thanks for joining me, mate. I mean, I appreciate the invite. I am about as good as I can be as a man who is watching the fall of his country outside his very window. I was actually talking, so we at Lotus Eaters have a gold tier subscriber Zoom call once a month, the end of the month. And for 5 minutes, we'll have a rotating cast of our subscribers who come through and ask us questions and have a chat. And they always ask us how we are, because they have what I suppose feels like a personal relationship with a lot of the hosts. And we always give the same answer, which is, in our own personal lives, everything's going pretty well. Like, for me, my career and my family and my girlfriend and my friends, they're all pretty good. But that's in spite of everything falling to complete rack and ruin beyond our control, just beyond our doorstep. You know, it's a really weird disjunction.
Yeah, it's very strange, isn't it? And, you know, I was thinking earlier, I've known you now for a few years, I think. And the first time I saw you in the kind of media sphere, I think you were doing the media rounds and you were on Talk TV and you were talking about the World Economic Forum. And that was the first time I saw anyone on the mainstream platform actually talking about something so relevant at the time and still is now. And it was quite blackpilling, but at the same time, it was comforting seeing someone else. And you're Gen Z, right?
Yeah, I'm 98, so I'm
98.
25. I'm just 1 year in. I have a story about the World Economic Forum segment, by the way, that I can tell, but please continue.
Definitely, yeah. And I was just going to say it was just refreshing, but also like, yeah, this is pretty serious actually. And it's been good to know you ever since and to call you a friend as well, man. So yeah, keep up the great work of what you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So after the back of that segment on Talk TV, because I had a regular Monday night slot named Tomlinson Talks, expect that name to be resurrected soon, with Kevin O'Sullivan. And I went on with Peter Cardwell, who's a friend, and Peter and I have disagreed substantively on different things, as we did a couple of weeks ago on gay marriage. But Peter's an honest inquirer into these things. And he had invited me on because lots of callers in had spoken to him about the World Economic Forum, and I steel man the position as this is an unelected, unaccountable body which is having demonstrable influence over the policies that our governments are passing. And even if it is just a think tank, then we can assess its ideas and find them wanting and say, if we have no say over the ideas that are being foisted on us, then why can't we, similar to what we did with Brexit in the EU, say we want out of this, thank you very much. There's no mechanism to do that. And that was a completely reasonable thing to do. And up until that point, the only discussion that had been had on the network about it was Ian Collins inviting the head of PR from the World Economic Forum on to say why it was a conspiracy theory. So, just in the interest of Ofcom balance, I thought I'd provide some of that.
Yeah, so, that's quality.
A couple of days later, Mike Graham decides to do a segment on his show saying, I'll take in any caller to debate me on the World Economic Forum and I'll tell you why it's a conspiracy theory. So I replied with, hi Mike, I did this segment actually on Saturday with Peter Cardwell. So I've done it on your network and I've been on your show a couple of times and I think I can give a steelman position about it. Why don't we have a chat? And I DM'd him privately as well because I'd spoken to Mike before. And then Mike said that I'm never smart enough to ever speak to him again. I will never have a career. He called me a jumped up child or something to that effect in DMs as well, and then denied ever having followed me because he did follow me and then unfollowed me. And then I found out later on, and I don't know if there's a connection between the two, but I found out later on that I'd been privately blacklisted from the network by a couple of producers. One producer in particular. And when I took this up with Peter had said to me, this isn't official policy, what's going on here? And he rectified it. So there definitely was some controversy that came about from doing that segment, but thankfully I did a follow-up segment with Ralph and Peter as of this year, 2 years on. So now the discourse is mainstream to be skeptical of these kinds of institutions, both from my stuff and from stuff that you used to do on the ground by going out to Davos and interviewing these people. So well done to you too, mate.
No, cheers. No, I appreciate that. It's funny you mentioned about the Mike Graham story as well. He's actually, his producer was looking to book me for February this month or this year. And I don't know, I think he would have probably had quite the shock if he actually followed through with it. So no, that's good fun. So I was going through some topics that we could talk about. And the first one that sort of came to my attention, I think you might have mentioned this on the Lotus Eaters beforehand, and it's what issues hold the right, quote unquote, back from winning. Now, we kind of have to extrapolate that and have a bit of discussion around what that kind of means. But off the top of your head, what do you think are the main issues that are holding the, quote, right? I mean, that's kind of a loose term because, there are some people who claim to be conservative but are actually liberals in disguise. But what is holding the right back from winning, do you think, off the top of your head?
So I can assess this. There's a kind of causal chain, and there's three aspects to this. I'll set aspect one aside for now, but there are a lot of problems with personalities in this space, some of whom don't want to give up their eternally recurring commentary platform thing. And I say that without trying to be ironic here, because of course we're discussing and participating in discourse, but I would hope that we're trying to do it in a dialectical way that progresses things, small p progress, not capital P progress, towards something wholesome rather than just commentating and grumbling for the sake of it. So, but I'll set that aside. The problem with the right is that we don't have an institutional right. It's not like in America where Chris Rufo has a lot of funding and a lot of backing and a lot of momentum to go after DEI programs and subject it to legislative scrutiny and actually get things done. Because over here, the power structures, even though we quote unquote have the right in power, the Conservative Party, they are enthralled to a presuming itself neutral progressive liberalism. And so either actively or passively gatekeep out actual conservative, traditionalist, reactionary thought. They're hostile to Christianity, they're hostile to a parochial definition of English identity that does not just mean tolerance and diversity and inclusion. So, a great example, as we said before we started recording, you're not as much of a masochist as I am, you don't watch PMQs. I watched PMQs that was just on about half an hour ago at time of recording on Wednesday the 28th of February. And Keir Starmer gets up and says that Liz Truss has been spouting conspiracy theories with Steve Bannon out in America. She stayed silent when he called Tommy Robinson a hero, and Nigel Farage said he'll be Conservative Party leader by 2026, and Rishi Sunak, you didn't say that he isn't allowed to join the party. So is he allowed to join the party? And Rishi Sunak says, well, we're a broad church, and we're really proud of our diversity, and we had the first female prime minister, the first Jewish prime minister, the first ethnic minority British Asian prime minister, so actually, we're more progressive than Labour. Yeah, that's right, left of the real racist sits down, applaud from the... And none of the British public is substantively represented by that statement. That statement is woolly, it's liberal, and it cedes all of the ground to the left-wing framing and actually encourages accelerationism towards the sort of liberal / Marxist / woke utopia that the Conservatives, at least in their namesake, are meant to be combating. And so we don't have a power structure which allows our ideas and concerns to be heard. There are a couple of backbench MPs that are amenable to the things we say, but they're likely to be ousted because they're Red Wall MPs and the party's reputation has been tanked in the north of England at the next election. So we're in a limbo state right now, not really knowing when our ideas will be enacted and who is even listening that has the power to do so.
I think we're in a bit of a dire situation when it comes to politics because we don't really have conservatives in the Conservative Party anyway. But when we talk about the right, quote unquote, initially we were talking about how there are a lot of people who claim to be on the right, but are in fact liberals within. Do you see that as a massive problem, or do you think that there's room to kind of, I can't believe I'm saying this, but do you think that there is room for openness within the right or the conservative sphere to more liberal ideas?
You've been inhabited by the ghost of Francis Foster by saying, don't you think we can just come together? I tentatively mock Francis, that Francis has actually been very nice to me. I enjoyed my chat on trigonometry coming soon. Where I convinced them we need a Bacalli, actually. So I think I've been the most right-wing guest trigonometry's ever had.
Right.
But on that point, actually, yeah, like... There are folks like Constantine and Francis who have had a slow journey of coming to awareness on certain issues that we can share and are probably more open-minded to being persuaded than some other people who are actively trying to gatekeep the right as just being anti-woke liberalism, as we can just return to the 1990s, bro. I'm thinking, of course, of a man who most of us at Lotus Eaters have now had a spat with through no fault of our own, really, because we've been quite polite and engaging in good faith with him, like James Lindsay, who has an increasingly esoteric interpretation of what woke is, which makes him and other liberals like him the sole font of interpretation, which means that he can keep writing books and keep doing podcasts and, hey man, fair enough, it's the attention economy, but will sidestep any critiques of liberalism and refuse to recognize how we got here from its premises. And the problem with that is it's kind of a millstone around the neck of any quote-unquote right, traditionalists, conservatives, reactionaries, Christians, who want to gain momentum and enact effective change. So if we look at it in a Schmittian sense, and this is what got me in trouble with Lindsay. So Carl Schmitt, legal theorist in Germany, now proviso. For a period of time, he was in the party that was very unwise to join. He then renounced his party membership, but befriended a bunch of Jewish academics who interpreted his work and have since republished it. So he has been rehabilitated in dissident right and reactionary discourse because he's criticized liberalism as presuming itself to be neutral without actually understanding it's a comprehensive doctrine of the good, and thereby swallowing up all other doctrines and slowly dismantling them and their defenses and trying to contain all of these paradoxical incompatible conceptions of the good within liberal parameters and wondering why everyone's still squabbling. And one of the things that he said about liberalism is that in trying to make it so that everyone gets along, you are blinded to the emergence of existential threats that he said are akin to the Antichrist, almost like a beast rising from the ocean to swallow up the world. And then you have the liberal acting like a false prophet that says, actually, this guy isn't that bad. Maybe he makes some good points. I mean, one of the analogies that Tracy Strong used in their introduction to Schmitt's concept of the political was that if a liberal is asked, Christ or Barabbas, who do we crucify? The liberal won't make a judgment there on the spot. He'll convene a committee, and by the time that committee has been adjourned with a verdict, the wrong man has already been killed. And this is the issue with liberalism. It's that by the time the right has decided on a definition of direction of travel and has significantly salvaged liberalism from the problems it's created and thinks that they've got the perfect way of returning to the 1990s, woke has already captured all the institutions. And frankly, the liberals can't really disagree with the direction that the woke are going. They just disagree on procedure. So liberalism was created in conditions of scarcity. That's why they have property rights. That's why they have limited state.
Yeah.
But they also believe in technological, moral, and material progress. And so do the woke, in a way. They just think that basically because black people and women and disabled and whatever constituency they can claim ownership over have fallen behind, we need a unilateral and disproportionate redistribution of resources, of technology, of opportunities and power to those people in the meantime so we can achieve equality. But if suddenly overnight there were a button to be pressed and we had abundant resources, abundant equality, abundant power, abundant recognition, and everyone could live eternally validated, fat and happy, the liberal can't really argue against that.
No.
Because everyone's free and everyone's equal. So they're just disagreeing at the moment with a use of state power in a racist, sexist, whatever way. But if overnight we achieve the intersectional utopia, the liberals can't argue with it. And that's why fundamentally people like Helen Pluckrose or James Lindsay or Steven Pinker, even though they claim to be liberals and they claim to recognize the fallacy of the blank slate and the problems with Marxism, as soon as Trump comes into office and says some offensive things, or as soon as people turn around and go, well, actually, the LGB activism led ineluctably onto the T for technological and ideological reasons, they go, whoa, you're a bigot and a homophobe. Whoa, you're a racist. We've got to be more worried about the rise of the far right than we do the far left. And it's like, you're conceding ground to our enemy's premises. And ultimately, that lets an existential threat rise up through the ranks. Yeah,
it's very true. I mean, and I don't like the term woke. Okay, I think it's a bit of a dead sort of definition now. I prefer something like social revolutionary or something a bit more palatable in that respect. But I was going to ask, do you think that there is a woke, quote unquote, or a social revolutionary problem on the right?
I hate the term woke right because it doesn't mean anything. So woke can actually nail down the definition. I think the definition has been best articulated by Ash Sarkar. It's the only smart thing she's ever said, of where she said that woke means the redistribution of wealth, land, power, and I'd add recognition to that, along race, class, gender, and sexuality lines. What she basically means is gay race communism. That's what woke is. It's gay race communism. Yeah. And unfortunately, the liberals only disagree with that on procedure. So woke is actually a useful pejorative because the boomers can adopt it and they can throw it out and go, that's woke. They might use it in the wrong way, but they use it with such disdain that it's made it so radioactively uncool that actually there is a reactive gut-level revulsion among some of Gen Z. I think they're split into two. I think there's like hardcore anti-woke reactionaries and the children of the algorithm that have followed the great awakening deluge of woke content being fed to them through TikTok and that.
Right.
But that's better than the millennials who are just sort of passive libs. Right?
Yeah, true.
And so I think woke is actually a useful word to use because I've chatted to Eric Kaufman about this and he's used the word left modernism and Lindsay and Rufo have used critical social justice, and this is just intellectual jargon that the common public won't get.
True.
Right? Woke works. Woke is you're a self-righteous upstart who thinks that you are entitled because of some hypothetical oppressed group over there to take all my stuff and call me names. No, screw you. And so I think actually the social revolutionary is just the mechanism that woke uses at the moment. But woke is a useful label for the ideology that gives them justification for their pre-existing agitations, be it along ethnic or gender-based or even parental lines. I think it does work. I think we jettison it to our snobbish fault.
So then does the right have a woke problem, do you think?
Well, I don't know anyone on the right that wants gay race communism that is actually of the right. because Christianity is kind of against gay race communism. It's kind of the whole point of it. Or rather, gay race communism is an ideology that was formulated in direct opposition to Christianity. I mean, just read the writings of Marx. I mean, for God's sake, the Communist Manifesto, Engels had to tell Marx not to call it the Catechism of Communism because he wanted to actively attack the Catholic Church.
Right.
So the woke right, unless you're trying to describe, because I know Konstantin's talked about this, and my colleagues Josh and Stelios have talked about this, and so has James Lindsay. Woke right is just another attempt to be a pejorative to the right, but woke defines a set of ideas as well as a set of tactics. And so to just say, some on the right share the same tactics, well, that doesn't make them woke. They're just using the instruments that our enemy would also use, but they don't share the same ideological tenets. And the ideological tenets carve out our enemy. That's how we actually identify them. So I just don't think it's a useful framing.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. The only reason I ask this is because there are quote-unquote conservatives, ambiguous. It not only in Westminster, but in, of course, the media space, who do push for identity politics still, and do push for that sort of ilk of social revolutionary change. So, yeah, I just wanted to get your view on whether you think that there is a seeping problem within conservative spaces, that they end up taking the bait almost, and they end up using exactly the same mechanisms as what the far left uses in order to get their point across, or to stick it to the other side, when really it's making them look like their quote unquote opposition.
Okay, I see. So I see what you're getting at. Yes, there is. Maybe I'm being a bit obtuse about policing the definitional borders, but we know this is the case when Question Time invites as its right-wing representative on Tom Harwood.
Right. Or
GB News puts Albie, who, we've both had drinks with, and he's a personable chap, on its panel as the right-wing representative. It's to me, it's entirely absurd, because they're Blairites, they're liberals, they're social permissives. They just quabble over paying less tax for gay race communism, even though they also want gay race communism to be achieved. And so, yes, there is the tendency on, quote unquote, the right by the establishment to categorize liberals and people who don't disagree on woke aims as right wing, but they're not actually right wing. The only other thing I will say is that the quote unquote right, and you see this with Conservative Inc. in America, but also to a degree, and now some of these commentators resent this, like Calvin Robinson, with dissident media in the UK, is that they feel compelled to put their narratives in the mouths of the constituencies that the left and the woke lay claim to. So Calvin's rise, as Calvin has said in his interview with Carl before he joined Lotus Eaters, Calvin's rise was prompted by the fact that he used to be a teacher and he was whistleblowing on a lot of critical race theory in schools. Then BLM came along in 2020 and his exact words were, "Hey, you're brown and conservative, talk about this." And he said, "Well, I got exhausted just being the black commentator. I actually want to talk about issues of faith and national identity and men and women's relationships." And so he had a much broader box of opinions to have, but instead he was hemmed in because there is a strange need to have all of our opinions validated by parceling it through a progressive filter, because we live in Blairite logic. So we need a based black guy to say things that we already think. Or we need a based woman to say, and don't from a standpoint, epistemology is important when you're talking to certain crowds, but you don't need someone of that ilk to make that critique in all times and all places. We see the same sort of thing, I think, with the Daily Wire's films, right? This is a whole broader concept. I know you've spoken to John Doyle before. He's a good video on why conservatives culture. I did the same thing and wound up my entire audience. But hey, I have my hate watchers. Making culture doesn't work if you're making it by the left's precepts and trying to capture the same leftist ground. So, Daily Wire has done some films so far. They've done Lady Ballers, which, didn't watch it, but it was a 2000s comedy. But then the other films they've done are Run, Hide, Fight, Terror on the Prairie, and now the Snow White film. And all of these are both trying to get rid of female empowerment narratives, but also always putting it through a sort of empowered female lens. It's not that they're not feminine, but they're still in the driving seat of the narrative. So they're almost making all of their cultural products in direct rejoinder to the left rather than making good things for their own sake. And the best films from the 80s and 90s were made for their own sake, and they had staying power. And this is why, optically, I think this is the trouble that I got in. Even though her message is appalling, Taylor Swift dating a football player is more of a win for the right than any rap with Ben Shapiro and Tom McDonald, because it's just cringeworthy no matter what the lyrics are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we're tripping over ourselves and like stepping on weird landmines and insisting that everything be said through someone that our enemies might be more approving of, even though they would rather see us dead than happy. I just don't understand the tactics here.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean, and I struggle with the right or the conservative era, because conservatism, growing up when I was a filthy communist, I used to think that conservatives were just a bit too I don't know, uppity and stiff upper lip, and very much like I don't know, too weird and too nerdy to go near, and they're not very cultured, and they just sit around and listen to classical music and nothing else, and they don't go out and do things. Where obviously that's obviously not the case. That's just my silly communist bubble. But I still, even as someone who does say that they are conservative, I still do think that there are elements that are so cringy when trying to recapture culture or trying to go out and, I don't know, make their imprint on culture and trying to take it back in that respect. I think when it's tried too hard, like when you see with the Tom McDonald and the Ben Shapiro thing that I couldn't even get through. I think it's like watching gore. You just sort of, you don't want to look, but you're sort of captivated strangely, and you're like, no, I shouldn't be looking at this. It was kind of like that. And I find that there's a lot of that within the conservative space in terms of culture. I mean, do you see the same?
Yeah, it's the musical equivalent of a snuff film. I mean, I don't understand why MAGA rap is a thing.
No.
And I think it's actually, again, because fundamentally, and this is me commenting as an outsider on America, and I really hope America does well.
Yeah.
I'm just skeptical of the ability for that continent that thinks it's a country to hold itself together. It's perhaps because America is founded on liberal precepts entirely. So the Trump campaign, the most conservatism rather, it can muster with Make America Great Again, is basically to be like Eternal Love Actually, where it's a bit boomer and it's a bit cheesy, and you've got all of the multi-ethnic cast acting in a sort of same liberal cosmopolitan way that's a little bit endearing, but all of the conceptions of the good are privatized. Because Trump doesn't really talk about Christianity, for example. So when asked, there's a great clip of him in Trump Tower when he was running for president, and he's asked, "What's your favorite Bible verse?" And he's like, "I like all of it. I can't really narrow it down."
Dearie me.
Yeah, the most Christian thing he did was go out in front of St. John's Church when BLM had.
That's it, and held up a Bible, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly, and that was called a photo op. Now, that wasn't a photo op at all, because he was sent into the presidential bunker by firebombing insurgents. Frankly, I think he should have sent in the National Guard everywhere, because they were going to call him a fascist anyway. The least he could have done is save lives and billions of dollars in damage. But that is the most he's done to show significance to the founding Christian roots of the United States. And so I think this is, again, part of the problem with the creation of conservative culture. You don't have a strong value distinct identity if you're just trying to create products that encourage everyone to sort of get along. You end up being right back to the place that then gave birth to woke and racial antagonisms in the first place, because you haven't contended with the incompatibilities of those private conceptions of the good. It's the same thing with the current mantra about sexual politics is what two consenting adults do from the privacy of their own bedroom is no concern of mine. This then becomes what one consenting adult in his goon cave, or what three consenting adults, or what five and a horse do behind closed doors doesn't affect me. Clearly the bedroom is not a magic portal, just like the border is not a magic portal. Just getting a piece of paper doesn't make you a magical sort of like productive citizen, or stepping outside your bedroom doesn't not make you a filthy degenerate who avoids everyone's eye contact every time you meet them because you're afraid they're going to bring up some weird sordid fetish that you have. Instead, you try and normalize it, right? And so rather than contend with putting out a conscious, family-affirming message that does have a dimension of shame about people's desires which do ignoble them, which is actually really beneficial to people, rather than just leaving them to wander the wilderness of sordid passions. Rather than do that, the Conservatives have relinquished this ability to be affirmative in the moral space and just defaulted to a hands-off liberalism. And again, that allows your enemies to proliferate, particularly when my generation are drawn towards these narratives because they are a capital P positive doctrine of the good. They're not good, but they are forward-facing. And if you are a Gen Zer who has had a broken home, who can't own a home, whose opportunity ceiling has been drastically lowered, who has had a deluge of videos of suffering presented to you with a mechanism that is a total anachronism to human nature and human history, which is social media, because we've never been this interconnected, we've never been this text-based, we've never been this video-based. If you're presented with all these things, personal, financial constraints, lack of investment in civilization, and limitless examples of suffering, then someone who comes along with a comprehensive narrative that says, actually, all you need to do is these things, you'll be on the right side of history, and you'll have a house and a relationship, and you'll be happy, seems a lot more attractive than, and not to mimic Dr. Peterson because he's a personal hero of mine, but pull yourself up by your bootstraps, bucko. It's not enough.
That's more of that conservative cringe. Inject that conservative cringe into my veins, mate. Love it.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah. Let's talk about, obviously you're a Gen Zer, I'm millennial, but I, just the same as you, I can imagine, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, of course, but there is a strange, I don't want to say worry, or maybe concern to what the future for the next generation of men looks like, whether that be dating, role models, or masculinity. And there's a few polls, and obviously take these with a pinch of salt, but I wanted to go through them one by one. The first one is an exclusive Axios poll, where it says Gen Z is less religious, less Republican than others. And it said Generation Z adults are less likely than older generations to join an established religion, far more likely to identify as LGBTQ, and are less likely to be Republican, a new survey shows. And it says Gen Z, which includes those born between 97 to 2012, is the most racially and ethnically diverse generation in US history, and an estimated 40.8 million Gen Zers will be eligible to vote in 2024. So firstly, I think it's mostly looking at the less religious, more secular part of that. What's your take on the future of men in regards to, let's say, theology, let's say secularism, atheism? Do you think it's a good thing, bad thing? Should people just go their own way? What's your take?
Okay, there's a lot about this. I mean, I don't want to preface it too much because I've got a book in the works basically answering this exact question, but I think it's worth getting into it. First of all, with any poll, you have to take their sample size and location they are polling with a pinch of salt. And I would believe that Axios are more inclined to poll progressive Democrat cities. Whereas if you look at a bunch of different polls, I mean, the Financial Times just ran some cross-country data that showed that there's a bifurcation between male and female 18 to 35 opinions, where the women are trending more progressive, I think substantially due to birth control, but also because of progressive messaging and the hijacking of women's agreeableness and neuroticism inclinations by narratives of victim groups as if they are children, whereas men are going the opposite. Men are trending more, I'm not going to say conservative, I'm going to say temperamentally reactionary, and there are different ways of doing that, which I'll get onto in a moment. There's also a University of Michigan survey which shows the same thing. So I'm seeing a split between male and female opinion that's not represented there. Also, the statistics that says Gen Z are 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 likely to be LGBT. I've seen that from Policy Exchange, I've seen that from Stonewall. A lot of that are young women either identifying as bisexual or genderqueer without any substantive consequences. There are, of course, lots of people going down the transgender pipeline. For the sake of keeping you on YouTube, I think we'll keep that discussion there. But cool. If anyone wants to see more, I've done loads of work of that over at lotusseats.com, including between detransitioners and the like. And so I am skeptical to the idea that Gen Z are wholesale going the route of woke. There was an article recently from, I think, The Independent that was really furious that tags for traditional Latin Mass Catholicism, which, by the way, is a much higher birth rate than liberals, so we are going to outbreed them, are going up among young people. So is mass attendance. So there are a small and very passionate and focused cohort that are getting involved in politics and religion who have curated their own online experience by the nature of social media and are less default liberal than before. I think actually this was the reason why the millennials are a bit more ubiquitously, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, of course.
Shitlibbish. That's the only way I can put it. And it's because I think, and you'll be able to speak this, the millennials had a shared cultural reference point for the internet in its early days. Like, everyone watched the same sort of things on YouTube, and this is why millennial humor's so weird and cringe. Like, no Gen Zer thinks Nyan Cat is funny, but there are a lot of millennials that did. And so the Gen Zers can find their own subcultures, and those subcultures take on certain political flavors. And for the women that go towards TikTok, Instagram, and Tumblr, those are progressive. For the men that go towards Rumble, YouTube, and certain Twitter anons on the Vitalist right, those are focused on masculinity and vitality and trend towards traditionalist politics. So I think that's the split that you're seeing emerge. And so I don't really recognize those Axios polling findings in either some of the data that I've seen or my immediate experience.
Great. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, to be honest, because not testing you at all, but let's talk about the dating aspect. There's another one I've got here. It says how Gen Z is dating according to a new Hinge report. Now, I thought that would be quite interesting to sort of read out. It says Gen Z...
Funny for us. Yep.
Yeah, funny for us indeed. Gen Z daters, or those who were born between 97 and 2012, are 47% more likely than millennial daters to say that the pandemic made them nervous talking to people, according to Hinge's new Gen Z date, or Data, Advice, Trends and Expertise. Someone's getting a good grant for that one. The report, which is based on a survey of more than 15,000 daters, the young singles are also a quarter more likely to say the pandemic made them less confident on a first date. It says, quote, even now, several years later, or several years after, in fact, we first heard the word COVID. The pandemic continues to impact how Gen Z socialize, the report says. Now, I have to take that with a little bit of pinch of salt as well. And we have to take all polls with a pinch of salt. But it's unsurprising that even years later, we're still seeing the effects of 2020 and what happened there. And it's even affecting people's confidence to go out and actually speak to people. We know that over the years, technology has rapidly advanced so dramatically that we sort of depend now on social media with even work, dating, everyday life, even purchasing, products. We rely on social media a lot. Why do you think that? Do you see this, subsidizing? Do you see it like completely changing? Do you think we can ever get out of this sort of hole of hyperfixating on social media and especially with women and with men in the dating realm? What are your thoughts on that?
I have many. I think that the Manosphere has misdiagnosed a lot of the problems with this, but I'll put that to one side. Focusing on the COVID and social atomization aspect, yes, lockdown has had disproportionate negative effects on the formation of friendship circles among Gen Z. There were lots of Gen Zers who started at university and did multiple years completely remotely. So they have had a lot of experiences and a lot of social literacy just stripped from them. I mean, you can see this in the American Attitude Survey and a bunch of others that keep reporting that Gen Z have far fewer friends than their boomer counterparts as teenagers and as early 20s. They drink less, they have experimented with drugs less, they have fewer relationships. There was an extensive Atlantic piece from a few years ago that said Gen Z are in a sex recession, which I think is borne out. There's the statistic that's floated often about almost a third of young men below the age of 30 are still virgins. Now that, as Alexander from Date Psychology has breaks down the longer you go across the age brackets, but it's pronounced among the 18 to 20s, and that age is creeping up. And I think we're catching up to the sort of Japanese statistics where a third of young people are still virgins, which would be fine if they were getting married off, but they're not, because the marriage rates are also down, particularly across class strata. I mean, only the upper class are getting married, and that's usually in their late 30s. And a lot of them, if they're even having kids, are using IVF and fertility technologies anyway, which come with a whole host of problems.
Yeah.
But with dating, what's quite interesting is I think the very existence of the apps has created a consent bureaucracy with a false promise of greater options and greater specification and the ability to customize yourself and your search metrics to find the one trademark, then as before, you would have community selection pressures where people would introduce young people who might be suitable for each other. You would come from the same local town or broader network of friends and relations, and you would share the same culture. And because you had people immediately interested in your vicinity in the success of your love life, you would work through your problems and keep your marriage together rather than just several ties the moment you stopped contributing to making each other your best selves. And I think this is a symptom of our consumerist, very materialistic, very hyper-individualistic and atomistic self-conception and our present, because at the moment we've CV-ified everything. The dating app is itself almost like a product listing for yourself, and you're swiping through an Amazon marketplace of other people, except of course we don't have user reviews because then that would just be a nightmare. And so everything we do now contributes to how we can present ourselves online for social validation or for access to high value people. I mean, even the language you use for dating, the Manosphere particularly uses like sexual market value and write-offs and run through. And it's not just that it degrades women, it's that it degrades the human person in that it makes a metric of everything, and it makes relationships transactional exchanges of relative value rather than a sentimental consideration for the other person. And the problem for that is, and this is something I'll be talking about soon on Lotus Ears with a guest who's Harrison Pitt, who we've both spoken to. He's done a great essay about this.
Great guy.
He's been breaking down quotes from Manosphere influencers, and he looks at Myron Gaines from Fresher Fit, who's been rallying against marriage. And Gaines was put in the uncomfortable position in his kind of weird Islamo-Randianism, where a woman challenged him and said, okay, you're providing the maximum amount of value, therefore you deserve multiple women because they can't contribute enough value to a relationship that you can, only multiple women can. Well, say that you are driving your flash sports car around, get into a car wreck and you're paralyzed below the neck. None of these women are married to you for sentimental reasons. They're married to you for transactional reasons. The moment you stop providing value, what happens? And he was in the awkward state of saying, well, I understand if they leave me. Okay, does anyone really want to get to that? Or do we want to be in the position where we have built up a relationship of mutual consideration and solidarity between the sexes over the course of years? We've had children. We're part of an enmeshed network. And if one of us is debilitated by the tragedy of losing a loved one, of a unexpected cancer diagnosis, of an accident that isn't our fault, like we're hit by a drunk driver even though we are obeying the rules of the road, do we want to be in the position where our spouse sticks by us and cares for us and rehabilitates us, or stays with us even though there is no hope of getting back to normal? Or are we comfortable with people just leaving our lives at the drop of a hat because we're no longer contributing to them being our best selves? I think it's much healthier to go with the sentimental route rather than the transactional route. And I think the problem at the moment with Gen Z is that by the very existence of dating apps and the promise of perpetual optionality and freedom, they're all funneled into the transactional route. And there's this deep longing for sentimentality that just isn't being given to them by culture or by the various tech platforms that are monetizing their misery.
I think you brought up a fantastic point as well about the manosphere, where I have actually a big problem with that kind of sphere personally, only because I just see it as repackaged feminism, but just for males. And the idea of, women shouldn't sleep around and body counts and all that, but there's no sort of guideline for the man. It's the man is to attain as much value in terms of currency as possible and to sleep with as many women as possible and test drive women and all that. I think that's gross. I think that's so awful, and such an awful message to send to young boys and young men who do watch this sort of content. I mean, that's the majority of the content. And I'd quite happily go on whatever podcast or Fresh and Fit or whatever and debate this, and I'm sure you would too. But I'm sick and tired of this sort of content. I mean, what are you trying to prove sitting there with however many women, like 12 women all wrapped around you in this studio, tight studio, to try and flex about your Audi R8 that you've probably got, the bank probably owns, so it's not yours, and you're sitting there telling women, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, but then you have no guidelines for yourself in terms of obtaining or becoming a valuable male. That's to me, that's not masculine. Masculine is taking priority. It's not actually sleeping around with as many women as you possibly can, like some sort of, I don't know, caveman that's just discovered Tinder for the first time. And it to put it bluntly, it just pisses me off that so many people are sort of buying this nonsense. And I don't know what your view is. I presume it's I presume that you agree with that. But what are your thoughts surrounding the manosphere and that?
I've got a lot. First of all, I think don't discount the ethnic dimension to the manosphere. And there's a reason that all of these manosphere figures are gravitating towards Islam. And there's a reason where lots of them are ethnic minorities. And I think that's actually driving a lot of the conservatism that's showing up in polls at the moment in the UK and US, is that with the ethnic diversity of Gen Z, in London now, the city being majority ethnic minority and non-white English, and especially the under 30s cohorts, lots of young ethnic minority men who are predisposed to the warlordish promises of Islam are drawn towards the manosphere as a kind of evolutionary biological marketing arm for it. It's the Mott and Bailey, right? They'll advance an Islamist position of polygamy and promiscuity and masculine vitality, apparently, and then retreat to, well, this is just evo biology, bro. Read David Buss, even though he's renounced his own studies. And so that's a concern that I want to pop out there and just park for a moment. My main problem with the manosphere is, as you said, it's kind of feminist accelerationism, because not just the idea that you're going to go and sleep around and be proven and test drive women before you commit, and then you commit to multiple women. It's predicated on the exact technologies which facilitated the sexual revolution, which is the pill. I haven't heard a single manosphere advocate come out against the pill on principle, only instrumentally in that it drives women crazy, bro. But also I need it because I don't want to father a bunch of kids while I'm shagging about. But also there is a grift, and I'm gonna use it emphatically, to enrich the influencers by capitalizing on male resentment, which is aiming towards the liquidation of sex differences. And so it's achieving the exact same aims as the feminists. I put this to Paul Davis when the only time that we've shared airtime was on GB News. I got 90 seconds to make my point because her and some other feminists were arguing. And I argued against the feminists, but then I did put it to Pearl saying, well, you're achieving the same sort of aims. Because if you're saying that you speak on behalf of men and against feminism, some of your points are valid, but also you stand behind Andrew Tate, who has made his money off of a empire, which is the ultimate thing in miserating men. From the average age of 11, these predatory companies are preying on the impressionable minds of adolescent boys. They're causing them to have rampant erectile dysfunction to the point of where 4 million ED medication prescriptions were rolled out last year, mainly to young men. Yep. You're discouraging them from having relationships. You're actually making them really black-pilled about the state of women because you think that the Whatever podcast represents all women. And then in their resentment in being porn addicts, but also hating themselves for it, they're looking for an avenue. And so much like the conservatives parceling all their opinions through base black guy, all of the manosphere's opinions now need to go through the pick-me girl that is Pearl Davis and say, actually, you're just right about women, don't get married, and be a resentful mess, sitting at home, paying me to watch my podcast and paying the Whatever podcast to insult these women. And so you'll be right. You'll also be bitter, lonely, childless, and dead. And I don't think that's a good way to do it because it actually accelerates the goals of our enemies, which is liquidating sex difference and depopulating the planet. And so this is the critic that Ivan Illich put towards modern feminism, actually, if you think that I'm just being a feminist cuck and a shill for feminism. Ivan Illich was a former Catholic priest who spoke multiple languages and then released a book called Gender and was protested on campuses in the 80s with a giant phallus and was accused of being a patriarchal apologist because he turned around and said, well, actually, if you're aiming at equality, what the feminists are doing is they're eradicating femininity, and they don't realize that actually they're agents of like capitalist industrial production, which... And I'm not talking about free market exchange here, which people can work and change their goods. I'm saying the deification of creating commodities ad infinitum for nobody in particular. It serves no family. It's not like you're working for your own immediate household. You're just generating stuff for stuff's sake. And so all of human life gets reoriented around making stuff, and no one feels satisfied. And he was saying the feminists are just doing that. The feminists are commanding that women not have children, that they go and work the 9 to 5, that they take the pill to liquidate their sex differences between men, and they compete on male terms. And therefore the economy is quote unquote sexist, not in that it hates women, but it treats men and women as fundamentally interchangeable. It's the same thing that Rene Camus was talking about with the transportation of people, irrespective of their culture, back and forward for the goals of big business, which constitutes the Great Replacement. It's the idea that human beings are fundamentally unisex, culturaless consumer units. And the Manosphere talks about the same thing. Because how do you define your masculinity? It's not in your ability to serve worthy dependence. It's not, as Jordan Peterson nobly says, being the kind of person that can shoulder not just your father's coffin, but that can shoulder your mother when she's crying about the death of your father, which is a very sentimental, emotive, but very strong way of depicting it. Instead, it's, I've got 100 bitches and I've got a fleet of Bugatti Veyrons and I can fly to Dubai every year. And if you just sign up to Hustlers University to enrich Andrew Tate, you can be Andrew Tate. Well, spoiler alert, if you're enriching Andrew Tate, there's only one Andrew Tate. Not everyone can be Andrew Tate. So that depiction of masculinity serves only the materialistic liquidation of sex difference and not the virtue-based, vitalistic, embodied version of masculinity that Christianity or Aristotle, the Homeric virtues, would set forward. And so that's my problem with the Manosphere. It's fundamentally, they're trying to liquidate sex difference. They're just too stupid to know it.
And it's interesting because it reminds me, and by the way, I'm no saint. Okay, I was no saint anyway.
Neither am I, mate.
Yeah, so I'm saying this as a person that has been through this silly, hole of culture, and has come out of it and said, actually, I'm not happy, and actually, it actually doesn't do anything for the soul, and it doesn't give you life, and it doesn't give you purpose. It sucks you into this materialistic world of just wanting to chase and chase and chase with no purpose, and you're aimless. And it reminds me of when I was a flight attendant or a trolley dolly for 2 years, and seeing the culture there. The culture there is like one of these podcasts, but like on steroids, where there's no accountability. There's just, you go into a room, you meet all these women who you've never seen before in your life, and most of them are single, and then you go away to this lovely place, whether it be Barbados or the Maldives or wherever. So they have this, I don't know, work is kind of like their box, their playground. And it was mine too. And we would go over and you would engage in, of course, alcoholism and just there was no care. You didn't have responsibility, really. The only responsible thing you would be taught is about the safety of passengers whilst you're working. But anything after that, it was like blowing out steam. And it just reminds me, to be fair, thinking about it, not too similar to the media sphere, actually, thinking about it.
Yeah, sadly so. Yeah, quite.
But speaking of Manosphere, masculinity, and the final part, I wanted to present this other poll. It's a new February 2024 report called Emerging Tensions, How Younger Generations Are Divided on Masculinity and Gender Equality. And I wanted to read through this and get your thoughts on it. It says, a majority of the public say they've heard at least a little about toxic masculinity and the patriarchy, though awareness varies considerably with age. 2/3 or 67% of the public say they've heard a lot or a little about toxic masculinity, with awareness of the phrase the patriarchy slightly lower as 60%. It says younger people are most likely to say they know about these terms. For example, 60% of 16 to 24-year-olds say they've heard or read a lot about toxic masculinity, 3 times the proportion of those aged 55 plus who say the same. And it says younger people overall have a more favourable view of the term toxic masculinity, but young men are far more negative about it than young women. Goes to the point earlier that you were making about the divide as well. It says the biggest gender divide in views of the term toxic masculinity is found among the youngest age group, despite their being most supportive of the term overall. It says 37% of men aged 16 to 29 say toxic masculinity is an unhelpful term, roughly double the 19% of young women who feel this way. Now, correspondingly, young women, or 47%, are considerably more likely than young men, 29%, to find it a helpful term. However, younger men, though, still find the term more helpful than older men. So basically, even though that there's a resurgence of people saying, actually, toxic masculinity, patriarchy, these are actually very unhelpful, in comparison to older men, they still find it more helpful, even though that there is a decline in seeing the term as a helpful term, if that makes sense. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that off the top of your head?
I have 3 thoughts on that. Okay. I'll rank order them in ways of contention. So the first one is that we shouldn't be surprised if some men cannot articulate the value of masculinity if they did not have present fathers and an extended community of fathers and spiritual guidance and mentors in apprenticeship schemes or male teachers. Or all of our institutions are profoundly feminized. Most of the homes are very feminized. And even though I don't like Fight Club, the quote by one of the title Durdens in that we are a generation of men raised by women. Do we really think another woman is going to be the solution to our problems? It hangs patent over lots of men's heads. And so this does drive both the fact that some men are captured by the flagellation of their sex and some others, I'm a vibe supremacist, right? Find it so radioactively uncool that they disassociate from the entire ideology altogether and go seeking a curated experience, a cultural father figure instead in Peterson or Tate, or I think increasingly Rogan and Chris Williamson, which I think is a sort of healthier third wave manosphere that we're seeing.
I agree.
And the other thought I have on this is that per Gad Saad's popularized term sneaky fuckers, I think there are lots of young men who are going to nod along with the progressive line, either because they are strategically trying to sleep with left-wing women, or they're trying to get any date possible because they're, I can't put it any way other than dysgenic, spiteful mutants. Like, we've all seen these guys. They look like the Kuma meme. You know, they've got the patchy beards, they've got the dough faces, they take terrible selfies, and they're desperately addicted to pornography. And so these are the guys that will say, yes, I am toxically masculine. Please, may I have a crumb of attention? There are far too many of them. And again, this is a consequence of not enough hard boundaries set by a present masculine figure. So I am not too worried about the uptick in intergenerational affinity for toxic masculinity, because I'm also not a populist. I think that I'm not quite a great man of history guy, but I think that cultural and political movements are driven by a motivated, intelligent, and unique vanguard class. Mm-hmm. And so if there are a degree of a sort of cohort of men that are setting more attractive aesthetics and better cultural incentives, then lots of men will fall in line and do the difficult thing and stray from progressivism towards a kind of vitalistic masculinity. I would prefer a sort of Christian headship version of this than the Nietzschean vitalism offered by folks like Bach. Because there's also a little bit of gayness in that as well. And I mean quite literally, loads of those influences are actually, loads of the Anon accounts are actually gay men. I think you're going to get more guys following positive incentives if someone sets them. It just takes a few influential people to set them instead. And this is what I think the left understands, actually. This is why they pay so many influencers. I mean, not being funny, the Labour Party, people scoff, but the Labour Party are going to pay influencers to combat Andrew Tate clips. But if they censor Tate and the intelligence agencies and the governments and NGOs sponsor influencers to make loads of content, it's not impossible that you sway some people. I mean, there are plenty of idiots there sitting watching Hassan Piker giving him money all day. Okay, has the right got an alternative? Have they got a attractive, vitalistic message to a positive doctrine to give to men? Well, I don't know about yet, but they bloody should. And then you're going to win.
Connor Tomlinson, I could sit and just chat about this all day with yourself, which we do anyway, but it's great to get it on camera as well. Thank you so much for taking your time out, and hopefully we'll do this again very, very soon.
Yeah, pleasure, mate. Absolutely.